Three, two. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where everybody is in the world today. And welcome to our very first episode of Couch Talks. We're going to be interviewing Janet van Niekerk, who I personally have had the honor of interviewing twice before for various other companies that I've been associated with. But I'm super excited for this today because, well, we have a bit more creative control as to what kind of topics we can delve into here with Janet, which is going to be very interesting as we continue a series of interviews with her. And that's because Janet is a master numerologist. And just before we signed on, we were talking about all the various different ways that it can actually be applied in life to just make things a little bit smoother all around. So, Janet, welcome. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you, Stephan. And how are you doing?
I'm exceptionally good, very, very good indeed. And ladies and gentlemen, apologies. I do notice there is a little bit of a lag. That is because of where I'm based at the moment. The internet has not been great, but we do seem to have a nice stable line, which is good. But there is just a slight delay, but we're going to keep going because we have a lot to discuss. But yes, Janet, I am very, very good indeed. I'm excited to do this first episode where we're going to do a little bit of the basics, I believe. So we're going to be talking about what the elements of a numerology blueprint chart are. Is that correct?
Yes, we're going to start with that today, and then every week we'll go a little bit deeper.
Brilliant, 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 brilliant. Now, the first question that, of course, everybody is going to be asking is, what on earth is numerology? Is it just this woo-woo new age fashion thing? Is it an actual science? Is it spiritual in any way? What is the lowdown? What is numerology?
Okay, so firstly, you mentioned the word science. Yes, it is an ancient science. Very, very old. Pythagoras made the Pythagorean numerology popular, but it began long before him. And in fact, numbers is a universal language. So I believe that from first creation in the universe, I believe that numerology and numbers were very prevalent there. So I'm going to give you two kind of explanations of numerology. The first one I'm going to give you is an academic explanation, and then I will give a simpler explanation. So numerology is basically a belief in a mystical or divine information that is encoded in numbers. And the connection between numbers and synchronicities, the timing of events, and alphabet letters are believed to hold sacred information. And indeed, from all my studies that I've done, I have found that to be absolutely true. I have in my chart the arrow of skepticism. So did I just encounter numerology and, just go like, oh, wow, I believe every word? No. I questioned. I did charts. I was like, I remember even after I studied, looking at it and going like, this can't be working like this, it just can't be. So it was through a lot of trial and error and actually trying to disprove it that I eventually was like, you know what, this is for real. And the mystical component of that is because although it's a science and you can add and subtract numbers and do all kinds of weird and wonderful things with numbers, there's still a mystical component that you just can't quite put your finger on, and that's what makes it so exciting. So numbers underlie everything in our universe, which is a mathematical universe.
Yep.
And numerology actually takes what's known deep within the soul and the subconscious mind, and it brings it into the conscious mind. And so it's not stuff that's unknown. And you'll know from having done some numerology with me that it's kind of like yes, somewhere in the dark recesses of my mind, that rings true. I kind of knew it, you know. So it's like rediscovering an ancient roadmap that you drew up yourself of your life. And so with the numerology, it leads to a life traveled with greater awareness, joy, and ultimately soul growth, because that is what we are all here for, particularly at this point in time. And I know in my own life, it's been a quest, like through all the difficulties that I've come, which brought me to numerology to find the answers. I was just like, no, I've got to sort this out once and for all, you know. I'm not coming back to do all of this again. So like, it's now or never. I don't
Right.
care what stone I have to turn around. I don't care what scary stuff is under that stone, but I want to know. And so knowing yourself, knowing where you've come from, where you're going, numerology does provide that. So
Now
just to get to a simpler version. Sorry, you wanted to
no,
ask something?
no. I was just going to say that that is so very interesting and true because, and actually, I would like to ask you something, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I was having a chat with actually my mother recently, not specifically on this topic, but just in general, and she very vehemently asked, well, does that mean that you believe in fate? Because she's very anti the idea of fate or anything like that. And I laughed and I said, no, absolutely not. And to me, numerology, astrology, etc., whatever it is that you're looking into, is not about things being predetermined or predestined in any way, shape, or form. It's a way for you to understand when the right seasons would be. You know, in every single spiritual teaching out there, whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever the case may be, all talk about a season for this, a season for that, a season for this, right? So you can happily go and decide to plant wheat when you're supposed to be harvesting. You're just not going to have great results, right? So the choice is still yours. It's just about, are you working with the energies around you and the seasons around you? Or are you bashing your head against a brick wall and complaining that nothing's working out? And to me, this just is a wonderful way to know
Exactly.
how to flow more easily in your life. And then, as you say, it becomes a life filled with joy. And why shouldn't it be?
Yes. Yes, when you work with your ebbs and flows and the ebbs and flows of the universal and global energies, things are just so much easier, you know,
Yeah.
especially with business and things like that. It's just like working smarter and not harder. It's like trying to go crayfish, you know, you at the coast. It's like trying to go crayfish fishing or crayfishing, whatever, when it's high spring tide. It's like, no, you know. And so just like the sea and the moon have their waxing and their waning and their high tides and their low tides, so do we in our bodies, because our bodies are regulated by, like if the moon can move bodies of water, it's moving things in us as well. And so we have all of those ebbs and flows, and we are very much connected to what goes on in nature.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now let's get into what is involved in a reading, because this is now the next thing. So you obviously have spoken about various charts, but having worked with you in the past, I know that you refer to it as a blueprint chart. Is that correct?
Yes. So the blueprint chart is the starting point of everything. And the two components that I want to talk about today are the two components I need from somebody when I start setting up their blueprint chart. We'll talk about what it all means in a further, interview. But the two components that I need to have is their birth date and their names. So I thought I would talk a little bit about what I encounter with clients around the issue of finding the correct name and the correct birth date, and what I come up against and why it's so important that people know when they contact me exactly what names I'm going to be looking for. So the first thing is the birth date. So the birth date, I have the least problems with. People generally know when they're born. I don't need the time of, because I don't do astrology. So yeah. So I don't need to know what positions the planets were in at a particular time, like astrology. I need the birth date.
Gotcha.
So a couple of things that I come up against that sometimes create problems is occasionally you'll find somebody who's older who lost their birth certificate or something, you know, and doesn't remember their birth date and so on. But it's becoming less and less, you know, as people are becoming older and older and the older generation is falling away. Those kind of scenarios are less and less, where they don't actually know what day they were born on. Then I have scenarios where people are, let's say they live in Australia. I'm just making a silly example. They live in Australia, but they travel to the US and baby's born in the US. Then they register baby on the previous day or the following day, because the day and the date in Australia is at that point different to the US.
Oh, gosh.
So I do sometimes have that. I've got one client in the US and I have to work out every time I do a chart for her, I have to work out both. Born on the 13th or born on the 14th, because she's never been able to figure it out. And the one that feels to me like the more authentic one doesn't feel to her like the more authentic one, for whatever reason. And I've never been able to figure out why. And it's to do with this moving countries and so on, that, you know, they think, well, you know, if they were at home, this would have been the date. But now they're in another country and the country's a day ahead or a day behind or whatever. And that's thrown the chart out completely. So the birth date that I want is the date that it is, wherever it is you are born at that moment. What is the day? Because that is the date that I want. I don't want people to change it to Greenwich Meridian dates or whatever other kinds of dates you have. It must be the date in the country and the place where they were born. Then there are sometimes another couple of issues that happen with dates of birth as well, is they were maybe born late evening, but now the very rich grandfather's born on the following day. And so a little bit of bribery and corruption or whatever, and they register the child on the following day so that, oh, it was born on grandpa's birthday, you know. And that chart never rings true. It just does not ring true. And I had a very interesting case with a birth date where I had a client who was one of a twin brothers. And so I did his chart and he's like, yes, oh, wow, that is creepy accurate, you know. And then he said to me, will you do my brother? I'm like, yeah, let's do your brother. So we did his brother, worked him out. Oh, let me just stop that.
No worries.
Sorry, ringing on my computer. So let's do your brother. Yes, fine. So what's his birth date? So obviously the same as the brother's birth date and the name and everything. And I start the reading and he's like, no. And eventually I'm like, do you actually really know your brother? Yes, we grew up like this. You know, there's no ways that I don't know my brother, but what you're describing is not him. So then I remembered what my teacher said to me. He said, always doubt the information, never doubt the numerology, never ever doubt the numerology. So I'm in my head like, don't doubt the numerology, but we have twin brothers here. So I said to him, listen, there's something wrong with this birth date. And he's like, how can it be? I said, I don't know, but I'm telling you, there's something wrong with this birth date. I said, go and speak to your mother. Now I send him off and I'm like, what is going to come out of this, you know? Anyway, he came back to me and he said to me, you will never guess. My dad was the doctor that delivered us. He was born just before midnight. The brother was born just after midnight. So the dad not wanting to explain and the mom not wanting to explain to everybody why they've got twin boys that are born on different days, so that they've got different birthdays, one day after the other, and 2 birthday parties and things like that, registered the second baby on the same day as the first one was born. So I said, right, change the birth date to the day afterwards. Started ringing. It's like, yes, yes, yes. So the birth date is important. You can't
Yes.
jinx a birth date, otherwise
Yeah.
it's just not accurate, you know. So for me, that was like, wow, you know, saying to somebody, well, your twin brother, there's something wrong with his birth date, you know. It's not
And being
something
right.
one would usually do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, with the names, there's a lot more things that can creep in with the names. So I never do somebody's chart unless I'm face to face with them when I use the name, face to face with them on a Zoom call, or they're sitting in front of me so I can ask them questions about the name. And sometimes they will give you a name, and particularly the woman I have to watch like a hawk, because they want me to work with their married name, because that is how they see themselves, that's how they identify themselves. They don't want the husband to feel rejected because now they're doing their numerology on a previous surname and so on. It's lots of emotional stuff that come in with women with marriage and name changes and that, which men don't generally have. Sometimes they do. I'll explain that now as well, but mostly they don't. And so I need to find out what was the name on the birth certificate. Then I need to find out if they were adopted, because then they'll sometimes give you their registered name. And then you find out that they were adopted when they were 6 days old or 3 years old or whatever the case may be. And there was actually a name prior to that. Now, that's why I encounter the biggest problems, because a lot of people don't actually have the original birth certificate. They have the adopted birth certificate. Then when I work with people like that and I'm using the original name, you know, before they were adopted, they don't even identify with a name. Then I say to them, okay, we're not going to mention the name. We will talk about the vibrational frequencies of the numbers and the trace of the numbers. And then they're like, yes, yes, yes. But, you know, calling somebody a name that they don't identify with throws them completely, you know, and they will sometimes shut off like that. So with adopted children, there are a lot of things I have to talk through with them as well, and also explain to them that only ambitious souls come down and opt for adoption. It's not an easy path to take. They are generally overcoming past life issues. They've abandoned others. That's to do with the number 16. They've abandoned others, and now they don't understand in this lifetime why they have been abandoned, and you know why they feel emotionally disconnected and so on. And so luckily with the numerology, you can take it back and you can see where it originated from and the scenarios around that. So what happens then with adopted clients is I have to explain to them that they are, let's say, I'm Janet, right? So I'm Janet, but now I want to learn something. So I go and study Shakespeare, and I go and become an actor, and I climb onto the stage, and now I'm Shakespeare. So I play Shakespeare, I learn the lines, I go through all the motions of being Shakespeare, but at some point in life, I've got to get off that stage. And then I've got to go like, okay, I've had enough of this Shakespeare business. Like, you know, who am I when I get off the stage? But I've learned some things. I've had some wonderful experiences playing Shakespeare, and met some wonderful people, and, you know, learned a lot of life lessons, and gone through a lot of, you know, getting the lines right and all of that, and, you know, playing this person that I'm not. And so I found that usually around about in their 40s, deep 40s, they start feeling lost and disconnected. And then they want to move forward, but the answer for moving forward is not in the in the Shakespeare persona. It's in who they are. And then they have to juggle, because now they're on the stage, off the stage, on the stage, off the stage, and they're very, very confused. So, but eventually all the destinies and purpose is all in the original blueprint chart. Then I have people that change their names, like they didn't like their names, like maybe they were Afrikaans Pieter, and they moved to an English country. Now they call themselves Peter. Now they want me to work on the name Peter, which has got quite a different vibration to the name Peter. And they like insist, no, they are Peter. And I'm like, no, that again is an image read. Let's have a look at why you've dropped the I in Peter, you know. But I need that original name. So people sometimes change their names and they do not want to give me their original names. So that can be a little bit sticky. I have a friend
like that, actually. Yeah.
Right. And then another thing that I come up against is in countries like Portugal and places like that, they throw the surnames and the middle names around a little bit. Now, when I want the surname, what I'm looking for is the father's genetic lineage surname. In other words, if the father's surname was Smith, I'm looking for that. So I'm like, of these names, which one is your father's family name? Because I put that at the end, because the other names in between are all the emotional component, a completely different component to the genetic lineage component of the father, which is the mental and spiritual component that is passed down.
If you don't have the father's name, are you able to still do a reading? How would you get around that?
Right. So if I don't have the father's name, it could be that the child was never given the father's name. In other words, mom was unwed or she got divorced or whatever, and baby's born, and she gives the baby her surname. Then what happens is, although the mother made the choice, it's actually the child, the young soul's choice to reject the genetics of the father and to continue the male genetic lineage in the mother's genetic lineage. So then I need to know that it's the mother's genetic lineage that's continuing and not the father's genetic lineage. So I always want to know which of these names is the father's name, and all the other names between the first name and the father's name, whether it's one or none or three or four, those all fall under the emotional component, and I add them all together to get the emotional component. So I need to differentiate between that. And then you sometimes also get that the child was registered with a double barrel surname, like the mother and the father's surname that they combine, which means that, in fact, the child is the first bearer of that genetic name and will pass it on to their children. But it's neither the mother nor the father, it's both. It's a combination of that. So I do find that as well. And so there are a lot of things around the name. So there's a lot of questions I have to ask so that I can make 100% sure that I know exactly what names, the correct spelling, because sometimes it was spelled incorrectly on the birth certificate. And then they say to me, no, it was spelled incorrectly on the birth certificate. This is actually my name. Then I'm like, there's no mistakes. I want the name, incorrect spelling, and all is what I want. Because that's what you are registered as, and that is what you are known as on the other side. You know, the name that's linked to your destiny in this lifetime. So there are quite a few issues around the names that one has to figure out. And so I ask a lot of questions with the names.
Now, Janet, if someone really wants, and I know we're going slightly deeper here than we probably intended today, but I just want to ask one question as kind of a setup, I suppose, for our next episodes, and we can go a bit more in depth. If someone wanted to learn this as a means to sort of guide their life on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, right? Is that something that is feasibly achievable? And by that, I mean, so let's take myself, for instance, right? I have various plans and whatnot that I'm wanting to implement over the rest of the year. I've got a fairly good business brain in myself, so I tend to approach these things as a business plan. There's set goals that need to be reached, and then I work my way back all the way down to a weekly basis. Would it then be possible for me to sit down, let's say, on a Wednesday afternoon and go, right, I'm doing my numerological chart for the next week from Monday to Sunday, just to see what the energies are and check that against my goals and move stuff around or tasks around as needs be? Is that something that is feasible for people to be able to do?
Yes, absolutely. And I've been doing this for 23 years, so I've picked up my pattern. So when you start keeping track of the energies which go from 1 to 9, so you go through 9-year cycles, 9-month cycles, and 9-day cycles. And so when you know every year what your personal year energy is, your personal month energy, and then your personal day energy for that day, you even take it right down to the personal hour if you're doing an interview. And I often do that for people. And so I look at different times and things. I look at times for weddings, all that kind of stuff. But from a personal perspective, I know, like if you phoned me and you said to me, Janet, don't you want to come and visit me? Then I'll say, yeah, because I would like to visit you. And then you'd say to me, okay, well, what day are you free? I'll immediately go and look for a 5-day. And then I'll say, oh, well, next Wednesday is good for me because I know I'm in a 5-day, and I know from experience that if I wake, it doesn't matter what I plan for that day. If I wake up that day, I'm restless. I'm itchy, like I've got cabin fever, like I need to get out, you know. And if I need to do any admin work, paperwork, tidy a cupboard, it better be a 4-day, otherwise it ain't gonna happen, you know. And well, on a 4-day, sometimes if I haven't looked, you know, at my day energies or particularly thought about it because there's nothing particular that I'm doing, I'll just wake up. You know those mornings when you wake up and you just go like, today is the day. I'm tidying my cupboard, you know. And then I'm like, oh, I must be in a 4-day, and I work it out quickly and I just laugh, yes, 4-day. So we naturally are inclined to want to do things on certain days, but we've been smacked into these 7-day weeks. Now a cycle is 9 days. So they've messed with our cycles and made it a 7-day week. So that things are completely thrown around.
Makes so much more sense
And
now.
they've pushed us into doing the same thing every day, you know, like routine stuff, routine work. And it's not productive. It's just not.
This is so interesting to me because I've often wondered about exactly that. You know, what is it that causes me to, like you say, wake up some days and just be like, oh, I'm in the mood to clean and just spring clean the entire house. Then other days I'll be sitting and I've got a ton of work I need to get through, but I just want to go out and see people. And I know I'm on a deadline. I know I need to get this done. Doesn't help my stress levels because now I'm causing myself anxiety because I've got these deadlines. And it's so interesting how all of that just plays a role and would be, like you say, so much easier if you worked in rhythm with your cycles. So you could say, okay, I have a deadline for this. Which day energy is going to be best for me to achieve that deadline? Boom, there we go. And I can do this on this day and that on that day. And even the 9-day cycle thing makes so much more sense to me because some weekends I'm in such work mode, which annoys me because then everybody else wants to go out and party and, you know, dinner party this and party that and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, but I'm in work mode. Whereas, as you say, if we had that proper cycle and we understood how that operated and how it worked, oh, everything would just come together so beautifully. So, ladies and gentlemen, that actually is a perfect way for us to wrap up today because yes, I'm absolutely shamelessly punting Janet's service because if you would like to know how you can run your life more efficiently, get in touch with us, get in touch with Janet. and start learning this wonderful art and science of numerology so that we can all start to live a much easier life, a much more flowing life. Because I mean, I'm already just thinking about the big picture. A lot of our conflicts in life, and I talk about right from fighting with your kids about not wanting to eat dinner, right up to fighting with your spouse or your boss, or the person who cuts you off in traffic, to global conflicts, right? All start probably with not probably, do start with tiny irritations that could have been circumvented if you just were in flow, right? You wouldn't have had that tiny irritation. It wouldn't have escalated to the next thing and the next and the next and the next. And before you know it, you're in the spiral of just fight or flight, which is where most of us live these days. And then we don't even have the mental space to figure out what we should be doing. And then we're wondering why we're so stressed out, why nothing's working, why our businesses are failing, why our relationships are failing. And meanwhile, it starts with the tiny choices in everyday life. So yeah. Janet, any final thoughts for us?
No, I think maybe just keep an open mind. Don't listen to what you hear, what you read, experience it for yourself, put it to the test. That's what one should do, put
Yeah,
it to the test in your own life
absolutely. Yeah.
before you listen to others'
Anyone.
opinions on things. Yes.
Yes, for sure, for sure, for sure. Janet, it has, as always, been an absolute pleasure and a joy. I'm not trying to rush us, but I am cognizant of the fact that we're wanting to keep these episodes nice and short so that people have bite-sized chunks that they can get into. But obviously, there is a wealth of information that we can discuss here. I look forward to upcoming episodes. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned at the outset, this is the first of a series. Okay, so every week we're going to be releasing a new episode. This one was obviously more of an introduction. We're going to have an episode on how to actually utilize numerology in your everyday life. We'll do some examples around that. I even have a challenge for Janet that she has graciously accepted, where we're going to attempt to use this to track a company's ebbs and flows, much like people have ebbs and flows. Now, the reason we're doing that is because my background is in wealth management, corporate finance, all those good stuff. Love the world of finance. Janet, as she's mentioned, has no clue about any of that kind of stuff, very keen to learn herself. But I'm wanting to see where those correlations might be. And like I said, we're going to put it to the test, see if we're able to track these things. I will have historical data on hand so that I can say, yes, you're right, or no, you're not. And I think that's going to be really, really cool and really interesting. And then we're going to just look at other ways we can start to apply this in our lives, because everybody deserves to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it from us today. Janet, a pleasure, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.